We had intended to film this video outside, but because it's been sprinkling on and off and I didn't want to have it interrupted, I decided to bring some of the outside inside. It's based on hymn 379, Now the Green Blade Rises. So, let's all read verse 1 together. Now the green blade rises from the buried grain, wheat that in the dark earth many days has lain. Love lives again that with the dead has been. Love is come again, like wheat arising green. When I was a young boy growing up in Saskatchewan, my family used to go and visit my maternal grandparents who farmed just outside of Saskatoon. And that trip to the farm was always wonderful because my brother and I were set free from the constraints of life in the big city of Moose Jaw. We could play hide and seek in the hayloft in the woods, drive the tractor with my grandpa, try and shoot gophers with a .22, and swim in the nearby sand pit. Now, although making that trip was a rather major event in those days, we made it several times a year. And one of those was in the late spring following Easter, just after my father had finished the last service of Holy Week and just after the last snow had thawed and melted. And we went up then because winter was over and it was time to seed. And believe you me, there was a lot of work involved in preparing the ground for planting. And yet, although a time of work, it was also a time of promise. There was a sense of anticipation and hope at the comforts and pleasures a good fall harvest would bring. At the same time, there was also a recognition that the whole exercise might turn out to be fruitless, that the crop could be lost or fail, and an entire year's work of money and time and effort wasted. For all the grain farmers on the prairies, it was a tense time of waiting after the seeding was completed, waiting and hoping and praying that nothing bad would happen to those little seeds on which so much had been staked. Not only creature comforts of life on the farm, but the realities of basic survival through a prairie winter. And then came the day when my grandparents and all the other farming families would glance out at the fields and see the new shoots peeking their little green heads above the dark black earth, and the sense of celebration and thanksgiving prompted by that sight, even for a child, was almost tangible enough to grasp with your hands. Certainly there were numerous things that could go wrong, like drought or grasshoppers, hail or wind, a prairie grass fire ignited by a lightning strike, too little or too much rain, a hard frost or a late snowfall. But at least for now, it was time to rejoice. The wheat had appeared once more, and with it had come hope. Hope that the crop would be good. Hope that the future would be bright. Hope that life would be rich and full. Verse 2, let's read it together. In the grave they laid him, love by hatred slain, thinking that he would never wake again. Laid in the earth like grain that sleeps unseen, love is come again, like wheat arising green. Jesus, the Lord of life, had been laid in the grave, and like a seed that is sown and must die before it can bring forth its fruit, so he was planted in the earth in order to rise to new life 3 days later. In the same way, we who will die one day, we have the promise of the risen Christ that we will live again and live an altogether new and more glorious life. The words of this hymn frequently ran through my mind when I was preparing for the funeral of my mother 11 years ago. And that's pretty much the reason why my siblings and I, our whole family, decided that instead of a spray of flowers on the casket, that a shock or sheaf or armload of wheat would be placed on top of the coffin, which is what we did. And then at the end of the service, we gave everyone present a cluster of stalks with full heads of grain to take home as a graphic and powerful reminder of our promised new life. Like a grain of wheat which is sown in the earth and dies, and which later brings forth stalks of wheat which bear little resemblance to the original seed, so when we die and are buried, our mortal bodies serve as the seed from which will arise an immortal body, a glorified and resurrected body, St. Paul calls it, that will be as different from this present one as the stalk is from the seed. Related? Yes. But the same? No. Buried? Yes. But dead? Not quite, and not forever. Instead, we will only be sleeping in the heart of God, sleeping until we are awakened again by love, by the touch of the one who is the author of love and the giver of life. Verse 3. Let's read it together quietly as the melody is played. Forth he came at Easter like the risen grain, he that for 3 days in the grave had lain. Raised from the dead, my living Lord is seen. Love is come again, like wheat arising green. Seeds are planted, and then the questions come. Will they grow? Will they be straight and strong and healthy and full? Will those tiny seeds become all that they were meant to be? Grain to grind, flour to bake, bread to eat, food to nourish and give strength. Christ burst his tomb at Easter, ending the shame and humiliation of his death on the cross. He came forth as conqueror and sovereign to announce to all that God had vanquished the power of death, that the grave, the coffin, the vault, and the stone would no longer have the last word on our lives. Instead, we will live again, because love lives again. And not only the love that was seen in Jesus back then, but the love that is seen in him and in and through us now. In the relationship between spouses and partners and lovers, in the caring of family members for one another, in the support and encouragement that friends give to each other, in the consolation and strength church members share with each other, in the care and compassion your pastors and leaders show for this flock, for the flock of the Good Shepherd. Now granted, maybe that love of ours isn't always all it could be or should be or might be or will be, but it's there all the same. Love is there, nonetheless. And so for its presence in our lives, for all the expressions of kindness, for all the moments of affection and the years of tender care, for love, we give thanks and praise to the Holy One who is love, who shows love, and who gives love freely and abundantly. And now the last verse, verse 4, to speak together. When our hearts are wintry, grieving, or in pain, your touch can call us back to life again. Fields of our hearts that dead and bare have been, love is come again like wheat arising green. Stand with someone at the edge of a grave and look down at the casket and the ground below, and you'll know what it means to be in the icy grip of death. Visit someone suffering the ravages of cancer or a major stroke, or the parents of a child whose short life is about to end abruptly, and you can sense the devastation of a life-threatening illness. Look into the eyes of someone who has attempted suicide, and you can see the pain of loneliness and despair. Spend some time with a couple whose marriage is coming apart at the seams, and you can testify to the power of sin and heartache. Listen to someone tell you how they feel as though the best things of life and the best years of life have just passed them by. And you can feel the presence of great sorrow, of deep and dark depression and profound anguish. All of us know all too well those wintry times when life seems dead, when hearts are cold, when spirits seem lifeless and life seems meaningless. And yet into our pain-filled lives Christ comes. And he comes to touch our sorrowing spirits and our broken hearts. And by his touch he calms us, binds us up, and heals us, using only the power of love. Now sometimes that love of his is heard in the words of comfort spoken by a friend, or rediscovered in a familiar passage from the Scriptures. Sometimes that divine and healing love is savored and appreciated at a time of crisis or loss through meals brought by neighbors or even strangers. Or it is tasted in the bread of the Eucharistic meal, bread mixed and kneaded and baked from grain grown and ground. Sometimes love is seen in the lines of a sculpture, in the texture of a carving, in the colors of a painting, in the silky smoothness of a piece of pottery, in the majesty of music sung or played, in the stillness or beauty of a sunset or sunrise, even in the craft and cadence of a preacher's sermon. And sometimes it can also be found and felt in the words and music of a hymn, like this hymn, which weds text and tune together in a way that not only creates beauty for our ears and solace for our souls, but reminds us once again of this most important of all mysteries, that love must always be given and shared as Christ's was and is. That love must always come as Christ's did and does, quietly, gently, persuasively, surprisingly, not in order to conquer and overpower the other, but in order to romance and win the heart of the other. Just as wheat comes up suddenly and without warning, just as love often arrives unexpectedly and undeservedly, so the melody of this hymn carries us wherever it wishes, down like seeds dying, and up like grain rising, down like Christ buried, and up like Christ resurrected, down like pain hurting, and up like hope returning, down like wheat planted, and up like wheat arising green. And now please rise if you're able and sing hymn 379 together, and sing it quietly and thoughtfully, like the prayer it is. Amen.